In this narrative PowerPoint, we are going to look at electoral systems. Or in other words, we're going to look at the rules that different governments use to elect the people who are going to serve in their government. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this sounds like the most boring PowerPoint that could ever be imagined. What could be more boring than talking about rules? It's like when you buy a new game and you take out the instructions and you have to sit there and read like 20 pages of instructions, and it's painful. But I'm going to argue that the rules are the most important thing to know about a government system. Because, much as is true in a game or a sport or anything, if you understand the rules, then you understand who's going to win and why they're going to win. So it turns out that the rules that, even basic things like how do you elect your politicians, can play a big role in shaping what the government looks like. So that's why we're going to focus, it's just one slide, but we're going to focus on what these different electoral systems are. So we're going to look at one particular part of rules, because there are a lot of rules that we could potentially be interested in. We could look at the rules that are used when deciding policy in a legislature. In the United States, we have the House of Representatives and we have the Senate, and they are two very different bodies because of the different rules they have. In the House, if you have a majority, if you have 50% of the vote, you can do whatever you want. In the Senate, it takes a lot more. You need 60% in order to end a filibuster. So rules do make a huge difference in what's going to happen. And here specifically, we're going to look at electoral systems and the rules that people use for electing who is going to be in their legislature. Because for many, if not most democracies, the composition of the legislature is going to play a crucial role in determining how the government functions. Either because it's a system like America's, where the legislature has some major check, or because it's a parliamentary system, and we'll look at this in the next activity in the module. In a parliamentary system, the majority in the parliament chooses the prime minister. So either way, you're talking about a lot of importance being placed on who's in that legislature. The big decision that countries have to make is whether they're going to divide up their legislature into districts and then elect members from districts, that's the way that we do it, or if they're going to use a system called proportional representation, which we'll get to in a little bit. So single-member districts are probably the most familiar to you, and they're pretty straightforward. You have 100 seats in your legislature, you divide up your country into 100 districts, or into 50 states, but you just have 2 people per state. So you find some way of dividing it up so that at any given point in time, people who are voting for a specific person. If you live in a country that has single-member districts, when you go into the election booth, you're picking out a name. You're not voting, you may be voting because you like one party or the other, but you're still voting for an individual. And there are 2 different ways to do single-member districts. There's the way that we do in America, which is called plurality. At least the way we do it in most of America. So plurality is pretty straightforward. Whoever gets the most votes wins. That means that people can win even without getting 50% of the vote. So when I lived in Wisconsin, I lived in Madison, Wisconsin, which was, so I was going to school there, and it's a pretty liberal place, and they have a pretty active Green Party. So as you might imagine, the Green Party gets a lot of votes. And this means that even though the Democrats win, the member of the House of Representatives is always Democratic, they never get 50% of the vote, because there's always some large percentage of the vote going to the Green Party. Similarly, when I lived in Michigan, which is a very conservative place, you would usually have some third party like, the Conservative Party or, the Right to Life Party, and they would usually get enough vote to make sure that no one got 50% of the vote. And that's fine. If you live in a plurality system, then all you need to do is just get more votes than the other people, and then you win the seat. The other way of doing it, which they do in France, which actually we do in Louisiana or Georgia, so if you lived in those states, some of those areas have this as well, is called a runoff system. The idea behind a runoff system is that you want to ensure that whoever wins the election has 50% of the vote. You want them to have a majority, and not just a plurality. So the way you do that is you have the first round of voting, and then you lop off everyone but the top 2 vote getters. And then like a month later, you have them run again. So you have a runoff. So that way, if you only have 2 people running, someone has to get a majority of the votes. Someone has to get more than 50%. So that's single-member districts. And the other way of doing it, the whole big picture way of doing it is called proportional representation. So instead of dividing your legislature up into districts, you can just have the entire country go and vote for the party of their choice. So imagine if you went into the voting booth on election day here, and for the House of Representatives, you didn't vote for your specific representative, you just voted either Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Constitutional Party, Libertarian Party, etc., etc. And then each party would get a percentage of seats proportional to or equal to the percent of the vote they got. Depending on what kind of system you have, it drastically changes the number of major parties you're going to have in your country and what kind of strategies those parties are going to use. So the type of system we have, this single-member district plurality system, encourages two parties. If you ever wondered why America seems to have two major parties and third parties can't make it anywhere, it's because of the election rules we use. We have these single-member district plurality voting systems. And so you think about the logic here. Okay, let's say that you live in a congressional, let's say you live in Manatee County, okay, which tends to be Republican. And so you live in a single-member plurality world. That's how we have our voting rules. Let's say that there were 4 people running in a party, okay, 4 people running in an election. You got a Republican, you got a Democrat, okay, so Republicans tend to be more conservative than Democrats. Then you have an extreme liberal and an extreme Democrat. Extreme liberal and extreme conservative. So you got 4 people running for office. From most liberal to most conservative, there's the extreme liberal person, the hippie. You got some hippie party. Okay, then you got the Democrat. Then you got the Republican. And then you got the gun-toting party, the crazy conservative party. Okay, like think Yosemite Sam from Looney Tunes. So we got our hippie on one end, we got Yosemite Sam on the other, and then in the middle we have our Democrat and our Republican. Well, if you have this election where everyone's getting around 25% of the vote, the vote is really evenly split, then what's going to happen is those central parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are going to go talk to the people on the extremes. So the Democrats going to go up to the leader of the hippie party and say, hey, I know we don't agree on everything. You're a crazy hippie, I'm just a Democrat. But if we actually get together and pool our votes, then we'll be able to beat the other side. Similarly, the Republicans out there talking to Yosemite Sam, and he's like, we don't agree on everything here. You're crazy. You shoot guns into the air, and you say things like rootin' tootin' varmint. We don't agree on that, but we agree on a lot more than you do with the Democrats, so why don't you join my party? We'll fuse our parties together, and that way we'll be able to win. And so there's this logic forcing the parties to sort of fuse together to make sure that they win, because it's all about plurality voting. It's all about getting the most votes, and only one party can win because it's a single-member district. So the tendency over time will be to reduce the number of parties to 2 major parties. So if you ever sort of wondered why we have the Republicans and the Democrats and no one else, it's because of the rules that we have. In a proportional representation system, it's very different. You can have parties that only get 5% of the vote, because that'll still get them 5% of the seats in the legislature, and they can use that to bargain with, to try and become part of a coalition. So, depending on what kind of rules you're using, makes a big difference in the number of parties you're going to have, in whether they're going to sort of run on their own platform or they're going to compete for a more moderate position. So this is something you should always look for when you're sort of looking at how a state is set up.